Good evening and welcome to Spectrum News General Election Debate for U.S. Senate, the only debate in the race. I'm Spectrum News 1 anchor Susan Arbetter.
And I'm Errol Lewis, political anchor for New York 1 News. We're coming to you live from Union College in Schenectady, New York. This program is being broadcast on all of our stations across the state. You can also watch the debate on the Spectrum News app and at ny1.com without a paywall.
Early voting is now underway in New York, and Election Day is on November 8th. When voters head to the polls, the race for governor will be at the top of the ticket, but New Yorkers will also be voting for their next U.S. senator. And over the next hour, you'll hear from the two leading candidates who are running to represent New York in the U.S. Senate for the next 6 years.
Here with us tonight, we have Charles Schumer, the Democratic incumbent seeking a fifth term and currently the Senate Majority Leader. Also with us, Republican Joe Pinion, a business consultant and former anchor at the conservative cable channel Newsmax.
These are the rules for tonight's hour-long debate. Each candidate will have 60 seconds to respond to questions and will also be given the opportunity to respond if they are directly addressed by their opponent. We will also have what we call a cross-examination, where each candidate will be able to ask their opponent a question.
For those of you at home, we invite you to join the conversation online using the hashtag NYDebates. We begin now with short opening statements. The order was determined by a random drawing this morning. Charles Schumer will go first. Good evening.
Thank you. And hi, Joe. Very nice to meet you.
Good to be here.
I want to thank Errol, Susan, Spectrum News, Union College for having this debate. I look forward to it. In the last 2 years under my leadership, the Senate has had the most productive session in decades. For example, people always used to decry that New York sent more money to Washington than we got back. For the first time under my leadership, we got more money back than we sent to Washington. And I'm always fighting for everyday New Yorkers against special powerful interests. So for the first time in a very long time, we've gone after the pharmaceutical industry. They have to negotiate with Medicare. The price of your prescription drugs will be much lower. We passed the most important climate change bill ever. And as a result of that bill, heating prices, air conditioning prices, the price of HVAC for your home will go down $1,800, up to $1,800 by 2030. We took on the NRA and for the first time in 30 years beat them and passed successful gun safety legislation.
Thank you.
My dad's an exterminator, my mom a housewife. I come from Brooklyn. I know the middle class and how it struggles and how people struggle to get there. If you elect me, I promise to produce the same results in the next term.
Mr. Pinion.
Well, it is great to be here. I am Joe Pinion, the Republican nominee for U.S. Senate, and there it is, the legend of Charles Ellis Schumer. And it's a great one, but I think it's time for us to do some myth-busting, because he is, in fact, an exceptional politician, one of the best that has ever lived. He's a failed senator. He has failed the people of this state on multiple occasions. People have referred to this as a David versus Goliath fight, and perhaps they are correct. Because like that blind biblical giant, Senator Schumer has a difficult time seeing what is clearly in front of all of our faces. You have the exterminators, like his father, having a hard time making the ends meet. The farmers, the family farms, having a very difficult time making ends meet. 41-year high for inflation that is crippling all people. Seniors like my mother, terrified of the mailman because they think the electric bill is going to give them a heart attack. This is not a legacy of success. From my perspective, it's a legacy of failure.
Thank you, Mr. Pinion. We're going to start with the economy tonight, and our first question does go to both of you, and we're going to start with Mr. Schumer. The economy is one of New Yorkers' top concerns, according to multiple polls. Inflation has rapidly increased, reaching record highs not only in the U.S. but across the world. Would you share 2 ways in which you plan to provide relief to New York families should you win this race?
First, we've already provided some relief on the prescription drug costs, one of their greatest problems. We'll get down those electric bills and those heating costs with clean, good energy. But one of the problems that has been, one of the things that's created inflation is COVID and all the supply bottlenecks. So you couldn't get anything, and the price went way up because there were fewer goods. We are dealing with those supply bottlenecks very successfully. We just passed the CHIPS Act. Chips are needed for almost everything. And the lack of chips caused prices of cars, of appliances to go way up. Now they're going to start coming back down because of the CHIPS Act that was passed under my leadership. We also passed something, you know, when there's no fight between Democrats and Republicans, it doesn't get reported. But our ships were backlogged at the ports. Cost of shipping goods in and out went up 1,000%. We passed a law, bipartisan, that allowed the FMA to say, ship 1, come in October 1st. Ship 2, come in October 2nd, and the price is going down. People are going to see those results.
Thank you. Same question to you, Mr. Pinion. 2 ways that you would directly address inflation immediately if you were elected.
Well, let's be very clear. We should stop lying to people. The inflation did not happen overnight. It can't be fixed overnight. Just to correct a few misinformation facts over here, COVID did not cause the inflation. The response to COVID caused the inflation. The printing of money, $6 trillion of worth to deal with that virus of foreign origin, and we still have yet to hold them accountable. He talks about the CHIPS Act, and yet the CHIPS Act has very few provisions to make sure we actually have the raw minerals required to ensure that those chips can get made. That's like saying you're going to have the world's largest steakhouse and not having a reliable supply of beef. That's an expensive joke at the expense of the people in this state that are desperately in need of jobs and real opportunity. As far as what we can do, we can stop printing money recklessly. We can start building a middle-out economy that actually inspires the type of economic growth that is sustainable, not these one-shots and these Band-Aid solutions that are stale, they are tired, and the American people have seen the results.
Thank you, Mr. Pinion. Mr. Schumer, did you want to respond?
Well, the bottom line is we are finally reducing the deficit. Susan, under Donald Trump, the deficit went way up. Under the first 2 years of Joe Biden and Democratic control of the House and Senate, the deficit is going down over $300 billion this year. And in addition to getting the deficit down, we said in the very, very extensive IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act, for every dollar we spend, a dollar goes to deficit reduction. Never done under the Republican administrations.
Well, look, just to be quickly here, if we can interject here.
Yes.
Yes, you can talk about the Inflation Reduction Act across the board. People have said it is going to explode the inflation. It's not going to reduce the inflation. Certainly, you can talk about the work that you have done with President Biden in a vacuum, but we all know that we quite literally sent people home. That did very little to actually make sure that we're going to start bringing the deficit down. The deficit is going down because we were forced to spend so much money in response to COVID. So context is everything. We have to be honest about why the jobs are going up. We have to be honest about why the deficit is going down. It's because we sent the people home, and it's also because of the fact that we had to print so much money.
We're going to continue on this topic. Mr. Schumer, according to most economists, the Inflation Reduction Act, which was passed in August, will do nothing in the short term to address inflation. Why didn't you pass a bill that would directly address inflation immediately, since you were in a position to do so?
Well, we have, and the Inflation Reduction Act does do that. Starting next year, this coming year, the most a person can pay for prescription drugs is $2,000. That's a real cap. That's going to reduce inflation. Here's something else we did immediately. We got the president, I had to push him very hard, to reduce the cost of student loans. So that $10,000 for every student, $20,000 for Pell Grant students, they won't have that burden. Very important. And to reduce the deficit, unlike Republicans, we've gone after the big corporations. For the first time, they can't pay no taxes. 15% is a minimum that they have to pay, and we even tax the evil stock buybacks that they do, which will also help us reduce inflation.
Thank you. Mr. Pinion, Republicans are promising to cut taxes. Specifically, they want to extend the Trump tax cuts permanently, something that the nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office says is unlikely to bring down inflation and will increase the federal deficit by $1 billion. To pay for these cuts, Bloomberg is reporting that House Republicans are exploring changes to Social Security and Medicare and will use raising the debt limit or a government shutdown to leverage the issue. Do you support this proposal, and do you support this strategy? Why or why not?
Well, look, let's be very clear. I'm not here to be a rubber stamp for the Republican Party. I'm not here to be anyone's just token vote. The reality is that we have to talk about what is right and what is wrong, not what is left and what is right. Senator Schumer, he has been a rubber stamp for the Biden agenda, and the Biden agenda has failed us. If you're talking about what needs to be done, we need to protect Social Security. We need to honor the promises that were made. If we need to have tax cuts, that tax cut needs to be more robust for the middle class. We need to have a middle-out economy. And again, if we're going to sit here and talk about the American Rescue Act, if we're going to talk about the CHIPS Act, we have to be honest about the fact that all of these actual outcomes are just theoretical. But in the actual immediate reality of what they are describing, the American people are hurting. The people have lost $30,000 on their savings. The people are down $6,000 as far as earning power. People are down $4,000 as far as actual annual earnings. So at the end of the day, people can believe their own eyes. They can believe their own bank accounts. They are not a mirage. These ideas have not been worked.
Mr. Pinion,
it's the same stale responses.
Would you support that strategy, and would you support those cuts?
I think that we have to have a wholesale departure from what came before. All of these ideas are broken. We need to completely redo the tax code. We need to completely re-examine why it is that the same politicians come to us with the same solutions that always leave us in further and further debt and deeper pain.
Thank you.
Candidates, I want to talk about the outbreak of political violence that we've seen, especially the recent headlines. Start with you, Mr. Schumer. The recent home invasion and violent attack on the spouse of Speaker Nancy Pelosi has highlighted the dangers faced by many elected officials. Do you believe the attack in San Francisco is an isolated incident or part of a larger trend?
Well, first, you know, my heart goes out to Paul Pelosi and Nancy Pelosi. I've spoken with her a whole bunch of times, and praise God, it looks like he will have a full recovery, despite the vicious attack against him. Well, look, there have been many more threats against elected officials. It's been documented that I've received a few. We have to calm the rhetoric down. We have to make sure that we treat each other with respect and condemn the violence whenever it occurs.
Mr. Pinion, the critics say that the rise in political violence nationwide is at least in part a consequence of fighting words and the combative tone struck by some members of the media. As a former broadcaster, do you think the media can, in fact, lower the temperature of political disputes?
I think
should it?
There is a greater responsibility that must be shared by the media. I would simply note there's only one person on this stage whose rhetoric has quite literally driven an American to the doorstep of a Supreme Court justice to kill him. That was Chuck Schumer. So at the end of the day, yes, we can talk about our institutions. We can talk about the overheated rhetoric. But nothing changes if nothing changes. And whether he wants to acknowledge it or not, it is Chuck Schumer whose divisive rhetoric has led to the environment that we see today. I will not lay all the blame at his feet, but he has been in D.C. for 42 years, 24 years in the United States Senate. His chief actual tool in politics is the division. We are here to unite this nation. We are here to unite this state. We are here to tell the untold story of pain and suffering in this state that has occurred on his watch. Issues I hope we talk about, the children living in poverty, the crime that has gripped this state. 12 major cities hit all-time highs for homicide. That's always part of this lack of accountability for the lawlessness that is all across this country because our leaders have not taken that scourge of crime and violence seriously.
Give him a chance to respond.
Yeah, the bottom line is that we do have to deal with violence. We have to deal with the heated rhetoric. I would say, for instance, that one of the people who's heated the rhetoric up the most is former President Trump. And so we all have to calm it down. I don't notice that Joe Biden has done any of that. You compare the rhetoric of Donald Trump to Joe Biden, it ain't close in terms of heatedness, in terms of divisiveness, in terms of pointing fingers at people.
Well, just respectfully, Joe Biden's not running for U.S. Senate in New York. Donald Trump is not running for U.S. Senate in New York. You are, sir, and you were the one that had that rhetoric. Do you feel as if that was responsible, and do you apologize to Justice Kavanaugh?
Mr. Schumer, did you want to respond?
Look, the bottom line is that I have never advocated violence in any way, never have, never do, never will. The words I used that day were probably the wrong choice of words, and I said that then and say it now.
I want to ask you a question, Mr. Pinion. You called former President Donald Trump a, quote, distraction. But the January 6th attack on the Capitol remains the largest federal investigation in American history, with more than 800 people from all 50 states arrested and facing charges, a congressional investigation that has not yet concluded. Can the former president's connection to the attack truly be dismissed as simply a wedge issue?
Well, let's be very clear. I said that President Trump was a distraction as to our choice for who should be representing the state of New York in the United States Senate. If you want to talk about January 6th, I have said at the time and every day since then that any person who uses the flag of this nation to break glass at the people's house should be held accountable. And if you're actually noticing, what you have just listed off is what accountability looks like. The problem is that on that fateful day, those horrific scenes that will be etched into the fabric of this nation for eternity, we have politics that overheated. And now the solution for that overheating of our politics by Senator Schumer is to inject more politics into this wildfire that is consuming everything that we love. And so again, if we are going to change America, if we are going to have less division in America, if we are going to actually follow in the words of Lincoln that was quoted by this president who promised to unify us, that his whole soul was in it, our whole soul must be in selecting leaders that are actually going to stop using the rhetoric of hate to keep the American people divided at such a time as this.
Let me move on to a related question. Mr. Schumer, as of now, the DNC, the Democratic National Committee, has taken no steps to hold primary debates in advance of the 2024 elections, suggesting that a re-election bid by President Biden is a foregone conclusion. Do you think President Biden should run for re-election?
If President Biden decides to run, I'll leave that decision to him. I will support him.
And Mr. Pinion, between the January 6th investigation, the charges that Donald Trump faces here in New York, do you think that Donald Trump should run for president again? And if he does, will you support him?
President Trump is going to do what he thinks is best for him and his family. From my perspective, I plan on supporting any person who takes the scourge of our lifetime, the greatest civil rights issue of our lifetime, the miseducation of our youth, seriously. We have Jim Crow education in the 21st century here in New York. Our public schools are more segregated today than the height of Jim Crow. 60% of our children are not reading at grade level. 70% of the black students in New York City just failed the math exam, and we're not even here talking about this, but more importantly, we're not in D.C. talking about it. Even if you expand beyond our borders, 75% of the students down in Baltimore in high school read at an elementary school level. What future do they have? What future does America have? If our leaders do not treat this issue with the seriousness it deserves, we need school choice. We need it today. Chuck Schumer stands in the doorway preventing us from having that school choice. That is why he simply needs to go.
The question was about Donald Trump, though. Is that a maybe on whether you would support?
Well, as I said, President Trump's going to do what he wants to do, and I just told you the type of candidate that I would support. If President Trump is running on that, and that is something that he is going to do for himself, then I would entertain that. But at the end of the day, again, he is not running for president. Joe Pinion is. Mitch McConnell didn't send me here, as much as Chuck Schumer and the Democratic Party of New York State keep sending flyers with my name on it and his face.
Okay.
We're going to move on to COVID, and we're going to start with you, Mr. Pinion.
Sure.
Here in New York, 7 upstate counties are on the CDC's high community spread COVID list, and COVID cases continue to rise as we head to winter in several regions of the state. Under what circumstances would you reinstitute mask mandates and other measures?
Let's be very clear. There is no silver bullet. There is no unilateral case. But from my perspective, we are no longer in a pandemic. We are in an endemic phase of what we're dealing with in COVID. There should not be mask mandates at this juncture. That is just the reality. The mask mandates were put in place at a time when we were trying to cross the curve, when we knew for a fact that we did not have the natural immunity, the herd immunity, or the vaccine that was necessary. Fast forward to today, over 50% of the people that call this nation home have been vaccinated or have been exposed to the virus. Many, many more have been boosted. So I think at this juncture, trying to, again, retrofit a 2023 America with 2020 ideas on how we fight this virus is probably a really bad way to go about dealing with something that we have so much more knowledge about today than we did back then.
All right, follow-up question for you, Mr. Pinion. Should COVID vaccines be part of the regularly scheduled mandatory vaccines for children? Why or why not?
Absolutely not. the fact of the matter is that when we actually had the vaccine put out, when we actually had the mask put forth, we knew that we were trying to mask the children, whether we agreed with it or not, for the protection of the teachers who were the most vulnerable. Those teachers have now all been vaccinated. In fact, many of them were fired if they chose not to be vaccinated. So the notion that, again, the medical community has done us all a great disservice here by not actually being straightforward about what is the science, what is the actual scientific method that we are following. I do not believe that the children should be vaccinated. Parents deserve the right to make that decision based on what they think is right for their family and their children.
For Mr. Schumer, same questions. Under what circumstances would you reinstitute mask mandates?
I would leave it up to the medical experts. That's what always has been my position. They know best of anybody. And the medical experts have really been much more accurate about what we should do than others. Let's go back to 2020. Donald Trump ignored COVID altogether, ignored the medical experts. He said it was going to go away in 2 weeks. I was early on this case because I listened to the medical experts. And in fact, in January of 2020, before COVID hit, when it was raging in China, I called on the president to create a national emergency. He did only 2 months later, and COVID was already raging. So the failure by politicians to listen to medical experts will always result in trouble. I would defer to the medical experts on these issues.
So same follow-up for you, Mr. Schumer. Should COVID vaccines be part of the regularly scheduled mandatory vaccines for children?
Well, we've always had mandatory vaccines for mumps, for measles, for whooping cough, and all of that. We've gotten them. Again, this is a new illness. They're just learning. It doesn't have the long track record or history of mumps or measles. So I'd leave it up to the medical experts, as I always have, on these issues.
Follow-up for Mr. Pinion. In an interview on Capitol Tonight with my colleague Nick Reisman in February, you indicated that China is to blame for the COVID virus and that the U.S. has yet to hold that nation accountable. Do you still blame China for the COVID virus? And if so, how would you want to see the U.S. hold that nation accountable?
Of course I believe that they should be held accountable. Let's be very clear. This is not my opinion. The Department of Homeland Security has said that China hid the extent of the virus, then hoarded the PPE supplies we needed to save the lives of American heroes while we were actually trying to figure out what in the world was going on. So yes, they should be held accountable for the deaths, for the actual pain and suffering of so many families, like my own family. We lost my grandmother, who died alone in a nursing home because of the mandates that were forced to be placed in society. Even vaccinated members of our family were unable to see her. So there is a great deal of harm that starts and has to start with the nation that quite literally hid pertinent information at that inflection point where we quite literally could have saved countless lives and countless pain. So yes, if you want to talk about holding them accountable, send them a check, a price tag first and foremost, and ask where the check is. If you're going to talk about financial sanctions, then we can talk about those financial sanctions. And perhaps that's the type of thing that we might want to include in a climate bill, because any climate bill that we're trying to pass that doesn't hold the foreign nations accountable is probably as worthless as the piece of paper that it is written on.
Thank you.
Okay, candidates, it is time for the cross-examination round. Each of you will have a chance to ask your opponent one question. The order was selected at random. We'll begin with you, Mr. Schumer.
Thank you. So, Mr. Pinion, we have seen the damage that assault weapons does in our communities. Buffalo, an 18-year-old, right after his birthday, was able to buy an assault weapon and kill 10 people in that Top supermarket. I was there. I spoke to a 3-year-old boy. He told me and his mom together that they had kissed Dad goodbye. He was going to the Top supermarket to get him a birthday cake. They never saw the dad again. I worked to ban assault weapons. In fact, as a congressman, I passed the law that banned them. Unfortunately, because of opposition from many, mostly on the Republican side, we could only get a 10-year ban. And then when George Bush and the Republicans took over, they let the ban slide. Mr. Pinion, will you join me in saying we should ban all assault weapons?
No. And here's the issue. At the end of the day, we have to be passing laws that save lives. And the problem is that for 42 years, Chuck Schumer has been passing laws that do nothing they are intended to do. He wants to talk about the gun laws that we need to focus on. How do we get the guns out of the hands of criminals? New York City, there's not a single person with a concealed carry permit that has committed a shooting on the subways. You go to Rochester, New York, that has a higher murder rate than Chicago, Illinois. Now, on your watch, by the way, none of those actual murders have been committed with legal guns. So we need to deal with the scourge of illegal guns. You have not taken that as the priority. We need to figure out, when do the legal guns fall off the truck and become illegal guns? Who are those individuals, the small actors that are actually allowing for this scourge of violence to rip across this country, and take real serious solutions, not political ones? And the problem is, Senator, that you continue to prioritize the politics that get you into power over the humanity for the people, and that's what pass laws that keep people safe.
Your turn to ask a question, Mr. Pinion.
Well, look, let's be very clear. A few issues we haven't talked about here. We have got poverty unchecked in this state. As I mentioned, 1 out of 3 black children living in poverty. We have crime run amok. Shootings went up 90% in New York City. Homicide went up 30%. We have schools that are failing to teach our children how to read proficiently. And so my question is quite clear. When did becoming Senate Majority Leader mean more than standing up for New Yorkers?
Well, here's the bottom line. Take poverty, the first issue you mentioned. We passed the child tax credit under my leadership. We got no Republican support. It took half the children in America and New York, close to half, out of poverty. We wanted to renew it. We very much wanted to renew it. But our Republican colleagues, to a person, stood in the way. Let's renew that child tax credit. Let's make it permanent. And in terms of funding our schools, I've made sure the funding formulas go through Title I, which funds inner-city schools above other wealthy suburban school districts. In addition, we have provided in the bipartisan infrastructure bill $15 billion to help poor kids get broadband. How are you going to learn in school when you don't have broadband, when you can't be on a computer? In addition, we've provided funding for school lunches, increased school lunches and breakfast. A hungry kid can't learn. So up and down the line, we've been working to get this done. And incidentally, just about every one of these things, with the exception of the broadband, was opposed by the party you're part of and you associate with.
Look, just to be clear, I think we just have to clear up a few points here, because he's talking about money that is spent. And to be clear, in my lifetime, every decade, we have spent more money educating less children for worse results. So yes, you spend money. You're in the Senate always passes bills. The Senate always does things. But aren't we tired of nibbling around the edges?
Okay,
Shouldn't we be?
That's a question and an answer. That was just the portion of the debate where you get to do that. We've got more to talk about.
All right, we're going to move on to climate change, and we're going to start with you, Mr. Pinion. The transition to a fossil fuel economy will cost billions of dollars and displace thousands of U.S. workers. Do you support instituting...
Transition from?
Did you say something?
You said transition from or to?
The transition from.
Yeah.
Transition from, good catch, from a fossil fuel economy will cost billions of dollars. Do you support instituting a carbon tax to help pay for the cost of this transition? And how will you ensure that workers who are displaced are quickly retained and rehired by the renewable energy industry?
Well, let's be very clear. We have to deal with the environment. I think the question is a little bit off base. We have to deal with foreign polluters. 87% of the emissions we are trying to curb are emitted from beyond our borders. You're talking about China. And for the record, everything they make, from the T-shirts that are sewn together by the Uyghurs with cotton that was picked by the children, it is all has the carbon that is baked into that pricing. So the cheap goods they're flooding this country with has to be dealt with. The problem with everything that we do here is that we come up with slogans that have no substance. Green New Deal. We want to be carbon neutral. You cannot be carbon neutral without dealing with the fact that we need natural gas. You cannot be carbon neutral and bang a table talking about a nuclear deal or talking about the Paris Climate Accord deal without dealing with the fact that they get 87% or close to that of their energy from nuclear. So we need real solutions. And from my perspective, that is not the type of approach that's happened in D.C., but I will say it's the type of nonpartisan approach I've taken in my life as a spokesperson for Republican.org.
Are you anti-nuclear?
No, I think that we need to have a nuclear. The problem is right now that we have individuals that say that they want to be carbon neutral, but say that nuclear must be off the table.
Are you a pro-carbon tax?
I believe that we need to start taxing the pollution that occurs from beyond our borders. Okay. That, I think, is a place that we need to start. I think any other conversation that we have is not really being genuine about the source of the problem.
We're going to ask the same question to Mr. Schumer.
Yes. Well, I'm so proud of the Inflation Reduction Act, which did more to curb global warming, to fight climate change than anything that's ever been done before. And it was hailed by so many in those who've been fighting so long for this. And one of the good things about it, it's going to create, in reference to your question, huge numbers of new good-paying jobs, because the tax breaks to produce wind energy, solar energy, water energy, and included in the bill is a tax break for some nuclear energy. It's not my favorite, but it's carbon neutral, so we put it in the bill, is going to create millions of good-paying jobs, and these are jobs for the future, because we know these industries are going to expand because global warming is so great. This was the best thing that could have been done for climate, and it will reduce, this is amazing, Susan, a 40% reduction of the carbon going into our atmosphere by 2030. That's even stronger than New York's CLCPA. So I'm very proud of what we've done, and I believe it will create many, many tens of thousands, millions of new jobs.
Can I just get a quick response on the carbon tax?
Yeah, the carbon tax is something I would seriously consider. It has to be worked out. It doesn't yet have the majority of support. What we did had majority support, and my #1 job is to get things done. We got something very real and very significant done, and I'm very proud of it.
Well, it's real money, but it didn't actually help anyone today. And if you're talking about what needs to happen, it is not really serious about solving the problem. Again, the emissions are coming from beyond our borders. There is nothing in the bill that deals with the fact that the emissions are coming from beyond our borders. So until you're going to acknowledge that reality, then nothing that we're doing here is actually going to be able to solve the problem. You keep talking about these jobs it's going to create. Yes, I want the best wind turbines in the world to be made in America. I want the best solar panels in the world to be made in America. But from my perspective, all the money that you are spending right here pretends that electricity is a source of energy. It is not. It is a conduit. And all these people who don't have the actual robust power from a nuclear, from the actual natural gas, are going to be using dirty coal to power their Teslas. And that's probably a really bad way to fix the economy or to save our environment.
Mr. Schumer.
Yeah, the bottom line is that this bill helped in the whole world. And why did it? Well, when Donald Trump pulled out of the Paris Accords, all the other countries, China included, said, we're not going to do anything. U.S. isn't doing anything. We're not going to do anything. When we passed the IRA bill, I got calls, not only from John Kerry, excuse me, our ambassador to the world, but from foreign country leaders who said, thank God the U.S. is taking the lead. We're going to follow.
The French government quite literally was found guilty in a Paris courtroom for breaking the own terms of the Paris Climate Accord. Do you know what happened? Nothing. Because it was a toothless piece of legislation where no one was actually required to do what was written down on paper. So again, we need real solutions. I don't care what your issue is. Child poverty, you want to talk about the crime, which you don't want to talk about. You want to talk about the southern border. We still haven't talked about it. We need real solutions that are actually going to improve people's quality of life. The quality of life is on decline because of the failure of your leadership, sir.
Let's move on to foreign relations. Okay. Last month, Mr. Pinion, the Pentagon announced more than $1 billion in additional aid to Ukraine, bringing the total to just over $16 billion since Russia invaded that country in February. A number of leaders, House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy in particular, have promised that if the Republicans take control of the House, they will make it more difficult for President Biden to send more aid to Ukraine. The question is, do you agree with that position? Why or why not?
We need a plan. The people of Ukraine are in trouble, and we should help. And we have been helping. But there has to be a long plan. And part of that plan should have been preventing the crisis from occurring in the first place. It was Senator Schumer who prevented us from having the preemptive sanctions against Russia that could have prevented those tanks from rolling across the border. That is not just my opinion. That is also the opinion of the president of Ukraine. If you look at what has happened from Russia hacking our fuel supply with the Colonial Pipeline, Russia hacking our beef supply with the JBS hack, we have done nothing. Chuck Schumer has said nothing to prevent these attacks on the U.S. homeland, which is probably why Vladimir Putin over there at the Kremlin felt so emboldened and empowered to decide he was going to wage the first first war of expansion since World War II. So, yes, we should help Ukraine, but more importantly, we need to have a plan for that spending of money, because if we don't, it's wasteful to the people of Ukraine, it's harmful to the people here in America, including people all across New York City living in public housing, where we are close to $40 billion behind in repairs that have not occurred, that has not had a real investigation by the senator who loves to talk about investigations. So again, we need to help them, but if we're not going to help them, wasting money on a plan that doesn't exist is disrespectful to the people that call New York State home.
As a quick follow, if you're successful and you're sworn in January and you get a request from the president for more aid to Ukraine, what kind of conditions would you want to see on it? How would that go?
I'm going to ask for a plan, a holistic plan, not just a military plan, but also a strategic plan. For instance, if you're dealing with the fact that Russia now has the power to turn off the lights on the people in Europe because of their dependence on Russian energy, well, what is the plan to make sure that didn't happen in the past? If we needed to have more liquid natural gas tankers at our disposal, but guess what? The ship manufacturing here in New York and in America went underwater under Chuck Schumer's watch over the last 42 years. If you're talking about what needed to happen to ensure Russia didn't have the leverage to do all of those things, we needed to have an Operation Warp Speed to make sure that we could create effectively an Elizabeth, New Jersey, somewhere in the region where people in Europe might actually be able to make sure they don't freeze to death. That's the type of actual strategic approach that the U.S. Senate, the most deliberative body on the planet, should be taking. None of this has happened with Chuck Schumer, who, again, keeps talking about these Band-Aid solutions. Your job is to solve the problem. Your job is not to show up and have a press conference when we have a crisis.
Thank you, Mr. Pinion.
So you'll likely get another request for aid for Ukraine.
For it.
What happens?
I'm absolutely all for it. I have led the Senate to give Ukraine what they need. Ukrainian people are brave, and they are bold, and they are strong. They're not asking for our troops. They're simply asking for the artillery and air and drones and other things that they need to defend themselves. And it's been a remarkable success. I'm just amazed my opponent can't even admit that. Ukraine has pushed the Russians back dramatically. They have put Putin on the defensive. Do you know what we would have done if we would have just not done anything or done what Mr. McCarthy said? Putin would have rolled into Ukraine. Do you think he would have stopped there? He's a brutal dictator. You know what he would have done? It would have been the Central Asian republics. It would have been the Baltic republics. It could have been Poland and Romania and the Eastern European countries, because his dream is to restore the Soviet Empire. We can't be like Neville Chamberlain. This was a strong, successful, bold action. I give the president credit, I give the Senate credit, and the American people and Mr. Zelensky are strongly behind what we're doing.
Just to add in there, let's be very clear. The only person who's trying to be Neville Chamberlain on this stage is you. You were the one that prevented us from having the preemptive financial sanctions against Russia. That was your decision. No one forced you to do it. 55 members of the United States Senate voted to let it happen. You didn't whip the votes to make sure it happened. So you bring home the bacon, sure, but many people's bellies are empty, including the dead Ukrainians. So let's be very clear. At the end of the day, we need real solutions. We need to deal with the fact that the Ukrainian people need a plan. If there is no plan, then we're just not engaging in good faith.
Mr. Schumer, I'll ask this of both of you. How should the U.S. respond if Russia uses tactical nuclear weapons against Ukraine?
Well, I think the key here, Errol, is to avoid them from using them. And how can we do that? We can let the Russians know the price they will pay if they should dare use even a tactical nuclear weapon. There are many things that we've done against them that hurt their economy, but there's a whole lot more that we can do. By the way, probably most of this shouldn't be done publicly. You don't want to have people lose face. But we have to say to the Russians, A, B, C, D. And some of these things I know about. I'm not allowed to talk about them. They're classified. But A, B, C, D. If you dare use it, you are going to suffer greatly. And I think that will deter Putin. Just in recent weeks, he first said he might use the nuclear weapon, but then he was forced to back off and say, no, I won't use them.
Let's be very clear. The Senate Majority Leader for the nation decided to play Russian roulette with the Russians like they didn't invent the game, and he lost. When you're talking about what needs to happen here, that he thinks Vladimir Putin learned his lesson, that's funny because that's also what the president said when he believed that Vladimir Putin didn't know about the hacking of our fuel supply. 45% of the fuel to the eastern seaboard was shut down. The gas stations in Virginia out of gas because of Russian hackers, as if you can hack the American fuel supply from a cafe in St. Petersburg without actually knowing that the Kremlin clearly knows what's happening. So this type of notion where we just leave it to Beaver, say that we think Putin is getting the message. He clearly hasn't gotten the message, not when it comes to not attacking the U.S. homeland and not when it comes to not rolling tanks across the border to impact those people in Ukraine.
We're going to move on to our next topic, which is abortion. And the first question does go to you, Mr. Pinion. Should women in New York have the legal right to have an abortion?
Women in New York have the right to have an abortion. It's been codified into law before Roe v. Wade was ever passed. It remains codified in New York state law.
But do you believe that women in New York should have the legal right to have an abortion?
Women in New York have the right to have an abortion.
I'm asking about your personal. I'm running for
United States Senate, Susan. The reality is that at the end of the day, that is the law of the land in the state of New York. From my perspective, again, when we have these conversations, we're not talking about the fentanyl that's killing people all across this state, the northern regions and north country that impact the most. No, we're here talking about an issue that is settled law in New York state amongst people who are running for federal office. So again, I think that we should stop lying to women. I think that we should stop weaponizing.
Do you support a proposed ban, national ban on abortion after 15 weeks?
I do not support a national ban because the Supreme Court just said that it was a matter reserved for the states. I think that we should have less patience for politicians that use their perch to knowingly pass legislation that violates the law. And they've been doing it for a very long time. And so Chuck Schumer will say whatever he's going to say. Lindsey Graham's going to say whatever he's going to say. They're both willing to lie for the headlines and the votes. It's wrong, and it needs to stop.
Mr. Schumer, in many states, a teenager can have an abortion without her parents' consent or knowledge, but can't get an aspirin from a school nurse without parental authorization. Do you support any restrictions or parental notification regarding abortion access for minors?
First, let me say you can see that my opponent doesn't want to answer the question directly, and it is very relevant because Mitch McConnell, Lindsey Graham, and a large number of the senators he will ally with have said they want a national ban, a national ban. And so if people don't want that national ban, which would overrule New York's law, they have to elect Democrats to the Senate because we want to preserve a woman's right to choose with Roe and all its protections. If you elect Republican senators, you will face a national abortion ban. And I understand it's very unpopular, but my opponent doesn't want to speak clearly to it. As for your specific question, I support Roe and all the protections that have been written into it. And that was the law before the Supreme Court decision. And that should continue to be the law.
So when I ask you if you support any restrictions or parental notification regarding minors, the answer is no.
No, there are restrictions in Roe, but the law has allowed parental consent for young people who would be afraid to tell their parents and be faced with the kind of back alley abortions that we've seen in the past.
Did you want to respond to that?
Yeah, just to be clear. So obviously, he also did not want to answer the question. He likes to talk about answering the question the way that they want you to answer it when it's convenient for him. To be clear, again, I just want to reiterate, Mitch McConnell did not send me here. I am not an 82-year-old white man from Kentucky. I'm a 39-year-old black man from Yonkers who simply wants to have a conversation about the fact that our black children are not reading at grade level, and that our southern border has been turned into a gangster's paradise, and that yet, unfortunately, when you're actually talking about what happens in D.C., you have people who think that we're just a rubber stamp based on the letter next to our name or the voter registration card. So again, there's only one person on this stage who's received $80,000 from the Trump family. It's you. And there's only one person on this stage whose family has given money to Mitch McConnell. That is also you.
Thank you.
Let me move on to a related question, the Supreme Court. Mr. Schumer, most of the justices who voted to overturn Roe versus Wade had said during confirmation hearings that they considered abortion rights to be settled law that should be respected and accepted, after which they struck down the law at the first opportunity. Since the statements of Supreme Court nominees are made under oath, should there be consequences for being evasive or dishonest during nomination hearings?
Well, let me say the best thing that we can do right now to deal with these horrible MAGA justices, these 5 justices are so far away from where the American people are on the issue of choice, on the issue of concealed carry. They had said, and they struck down a law that said that our police could be notified when someone was concealing their gun. Now someone in South Carolina can get a gun, no questions asked, come to New York and endanger the safety of our citizens and our police. They also said that these coal-spewing plants, they said, the federal government shouldn't regulate them. So this is a MAGA court. What can we do about that MAGA court? The best thing we can do is what we have done in the Senate majority. We have put in 83 judges in the circuit courts and the district courts who will counterbalance these horrible MAGA judges. They are mainstream and they represent America. 2/3 are women. We hardly had women justices or judges in the past. We put in Ketanji Brown Jackson, first African-American justice, and she will be able to be a counterbalance to these people. That is the best thing we can do, and we have done it and even set a record, or close to it, of how many judges we have put on the bench at the circuit and district courts, which are very important because the Supreme Court only hears about 75 decisions a year.
Okay, so Mr. Pinion, same question. If judges come in and in their nomination hearing they say, well, we think it's settled law, then they act differently, should they be held accountable for that?
Well, look, from my perspective, judges, jurists, we have to trust them that they're going to make decisions based on the facts and the letter of the law that is in front of them. I don't believe that you can have any type of litmus test for judges, and I don't believe that you should be having some type of post hoc, after the fact, accountability for what they said during a hearing. I think what we have to talk about is the fact that we do not have Obama justices, we do not have Trump justices, we do not have Clinton justices. We just have justices who are doing their level best to interpret the law, to follow the letter of the law as they see fit. And I think the reality is, again, that the reason why Senator Schumer, he throws around the word MAGA this and MAGA that, even though he's the one who spent millions of dollars trying to elect MAGA people as nominees across this country, it's not because he thinks MAGA is bad. It's because he thinks that he's got a fair fight with MAGA and he can win. It's about power. It's not about people. And the problem with this state is that Chuck Schumer has spent 42 years making promises about what he will do tomorrow. It's always a day away, and you never trust a man who promises to do tomorrow what he had the power to do yesterday. 42 years of yesterdays are standing on this stage. He made some promises here 6 years ago. They haven't been met as well.
Okay.
I'd simply say to my opponent, it's not about longevity. It's about productivity. I have been more productive as a senator and as majority leader than just about anybody else.
You can take 10,000 steps in a day. If you haven't left your room, you haven't gone very far.
I've got a brief question for both of you. The number of justices on the Supreme Court changed 6 times before settling at the current total of 9, and that happened in 1869. Would you support increasing the number of Supreme Court justices from 9, Mr. Schumer?
Yeah, the bottom line again is I'm looking at what we can do right now, and that is to continue to put in these judges who will be judges and even justices like our new Supreme Court justice, who will be counter to this right-wing MAGA.
So you're good with 9?
These are very, very, very important things to do now that can actually happen. As for the Supreme Court, we're going to have to explore the best avenues to deal with that MAGA court. And I will talk to my caucus about it, and in the new Senate we will explore those various paths.
Okay, including expanding.
Well, we're going to explore the best path forward.
Good. Mr. Pinion.
Explore is code for yes, so he is going to try to appease those AOCs of the world who want to expand the court. It's very clear. I believe that we are an imperfect nation founded by imperfect men with a perfect dream. And the things that have allowed us to get this far, to remedy some of the worst blemishes on the soul of humanity, should not be tossed away. We should not be packing the Supreme Court. We should not be getting rid of the filibuster. We should not be trying to say that we are going to do away with the Electoral College. These are the things that are the checks on power, the guardrails that defend this country, that prevent the Senate from becoming the food fight that we have in the House. And in this particular moment, where the flames of division are burning so hot, the notion that you would try to inject more politics into what is the last bastion holding this country together is unconscionable, unimaginable. I think you should be ashamed.
Let's move on. We're going to move on to immigration now.
Okay.
To date, more than 21,400 people seeking asylum have been sent to New York, Mr. Pinion, mostly from Texas and Florida. The cost of housing these new arrivals is estimated at more than $1 billion. A large part of the issue is due to Congress's lack of action on immigration.
Yep.
How would you address the problem if elected?
Well, let's be very clear. The mayor of New York City just declared a state of emergency for a migrant crisis. Chuck Schumer spent 2 years saying was a figment of our imagination. You deal it with securing the border. It is not equal level terrain. Some places need a fence, some places need a wall, some places need more boots on the ground. But secure it you must. We need to go back to the stay in Mexico policy. We need to make sure that the asylum process is cleaner, that people don't have to go through such a process that is so convoluted. But more importantly, we need to make sure that there's accountability for people to come. There are 4 million people waiting in line to come to this country legally. We need to make sure we're not hiring 87,000 IRS agents. Perhaps we should hire some more immigration agents to facilitate those 4 million people coming here, many of whom are joining spouses. So that, to me, is a conscientious plan to get the job done. I think, again, when you have less people feeling as if that legal line is not going to move, you'll have more people who are unwilling to swim across the Rio Grande because people are taking their life into their hands, pursuing an American dream they were told by this president to pursue illegally.
Okay, Mr. Schumer.
The best solution is comprehensive immigration reform, and it can be done. Senator McCain and I, back in 2013, a gang of 8, 4 Republicans, 4 Democrats, came up with a comprehensive plan. It secured the border much better than it has been secured ever since. It said to the 11 million who are here, we're giving you a pathway to citizenship. They have to go through a number of different things to get there, but there is a pathway. And it brought into America the people we need to continue to grow our economy and expand our jobs. It got 69 votes in the Senate, Democrat and Republican. I am going to work very, very hard to try and convince. Up to now, our Republican colleagues have been unwilling to do anything on immigration. But I think we can get this done, particularly in light of the fact that there's such a job shortage in America. The business community is crying out for new people to fill the jobs. And I think we can get them to get some brave Republicans, certainly a number above 10, that we can pass comprehensive immigration reform. That is the only real answer to this problem.
He's had 42 years to pass comprehensive immigration reform. If he was going to get it done, he would have already gotten it done. The reality is he stood on this debate stage many years ago and said the truth, that there is no appetite for solving the immigration crisis until we take the business of securing the border once and for all secure. That's not my opinion. That was the old opinion of Chuck Schumer before he had to worry about the AOCs of the world coming to take his job and his title. So yes, we need to have comprehensive immigration reform. We need to deal with the dreamers, because no person brought here as a child through no fault of their own should be held accountable by this government. That is the nature of what America can and should be.
Thank you.
But again, we need to have real plans, not empty rhetoric that changes based on the political circumstances of the day.
Mr. Schumer.
Comprehensive immigration reform was blocked by Republicans, and by the way, never used to be. George Bush, H.W. Bush, W. Bush, Reagan were pro-immigration reform. The new Trump Republican Party has become anti, but I think a number of Republicans could be fed up with that, and we could get comprehensive reform.
So, Mr. Pinion, will you push for funding to be sent to New York City and other cities dealing with the influx of new arrivals?
I think that we have to make sure that we are not spending money to deal with the flooding in before we've actually plugged the hole in the dam. We have a humanitarian crisis in broad daylight. We have a drug crisis in broad daylight. The leading cause of death for people in this country aged 18 to 45 is fentanyl overdoses. Chuck Schumer didn't even realize we had a fentanyl crisis until the poll numbers started coming down. Then he wanted to scare parents into voting for him just before Halloween, saying there's fentanyl in the candy. So I think at the end of the day, we need to focus on the fact that securing the border is not a talking point. It's what's required to cultivate the conversation here at home. It's what's required to make sure we don't have mothers, urban, suburban, and rural alike, crying over caskets for children to still be here. That is what we need to be focused on.
But what about funding to be sent to New York City to deal with the current influx of migrants?
Let's be very clear. New York City has deep needs. We need to get money here. Again, yes, we got $1.59, extra 59 cents on the dollar because of what just happened, but we also printed more money in the month of June in 2020 than we did in the previous 2 centuries. So again, yes, we need more money, but we also need better planning. We also need better solutions, and Chuck Schumer has not provided them.
Thank you.
Okay, we only have a few minutes left.
By the way, I am working with the mayor to get the federal government to support money to help New York. It is a federal problem, and we expect to see some good answers relatively soon, particularly on one aspect of that money, the shelter and food part of it.
Okay, we're coming down the home stretch, candidates. We have only a few minutes left, so I'll ask for crisp answers. Mr. Schumer, earlier this year you introduced a bill called the Cannabis Administration and Opportunity Act that would remove cannabis from the Controlled Substances Act, empower states to create their own cannabis laws, and expunge criminal records of those with low-level offenses. The bill also requires more federal research on the impact of cannabis on health and public safety. But shouldn't that research happen before sweeping legislation is approved?
Well, as you know, many states have approved legalization of cannabis, decriminalization of cannabis, so it's upon us. Doing the research is very, very important to do. But we are getting very close. I am working in a bipartisan way with Democrats and Republicans to take the Safe Banking Act, which allows financial institutions to involve themselves in cannabis companies and lend money to them. But it also does some things for justice, such as expunging a record. You know, when a 15-year-old kid was caught with a small amount of marijuana and got a sentence that was the same as having a whole lot of heroin and selling it, his life was ruined. So expunging the records is important, and we're getting closer. We may be able to get something done rather soon. I'm working with a bunch of Republican senators, a bunch of Democratic senators to get something passed.
Mr. Pinion, based on your years working at a health center in the South Bronx, I wonder if you believe marijuana should be removed from the Controlled Substances Act.
Look, I think we need to deal with the fact that we're not talking about your mom and dad's dope. We're talking about THC levels that have been off the charts. I think you bring up a good point. The notion that we would release it on the citizenry at the federal level before we've actually done the due diligence seems reckless and irresponsible. Just my thoughts. So, yes, I think that there has to be something done. I think particularly in light of the fentanyl crisis that Chuck Schumer invited here, we now have people that are trying to smoke marijuana and are going to drop dead. We have firemen that walk into buildings, you put out the flames, as they did in Chautauqua County, and come out and are dropping from fentanyl intoxication. So there are unintended consequences. There's a thread that runneth in between all of this, from the border crisis to even this conversation about marijuana, because Chuck Schumer has not taken the business of securing our border, and people are dying. And so I think in the event that we're going to go down this path at the federal level, we should do so in a manner that recognizes that these decisions have dire consequences and that people are actually dying in some cases because of them.
Mr. Schumer, we're going to continue this conversation about the opioid epidemic. You've traveled New York. You've promised billions in new funding to address the opioid overdose epidemic and now the fentanyl epidemic as well. How are we going to make that happen? It's
happened. And, you know, this is the difference between my opponent and me. He was a pundit. We're hearing a lot of punditry, a lot of pointing fingers, a lot of verbiage, but no real solutions. Not only have I proposed real solutions, I've passed them. So on the issue that you've asked about, in the AFB bill, the bill that passed a year ago, January, we had $5 billion to go after the opioid crisis, more than we ever have before. In the gun bill that we passed, we got $14 billion for mental health problems that are often related to the opioid crisis. You know, we desperately need this money. I was in Buffalo. A man came over to me and started crying. His son had gotten back from Iraq, had PTSD, and then became addicted to opioids. The kid was finally willing to go for treatment. He went to all the centers in Western New York, 23-week wait. The young man killed himself in the 22nd week. So now we are finally getting the money for the opioid centers we need and for the mental health provisions we need. I produce results.
Thank you.
I am productive. I'm not spewing verbiage and calling names.
Mr. Pinion, same question. How will you deal with the opioid epidemic?
There it is. Exceptional politician. Failed senator. He talks about the dead child. Again, always using dead children for sympathy and for votes. You've been there for 42 years. If you wanted to make sure you had equity, equity is what happens when we actually have a Betty Ford clinic in Harlem. Equity is what means when people in Chautauqua County don't have to wait that long. And they've been waiting that long for a very long time, before that poor man came to talk to you, sir. So at the end of the day, I'm not here just spewing nonsense. We have talked about concrete solutions, how to secure our border. We have talked about issues on how we actually get things done. You want health care? Let's talk about federally qualified health centers that are the tip of the spear. We need more of them. You, on your watch, have allowed them to become a tiny sliver of our healthcare delivery system. I know federally qualified health centers quite well. We need the most robust expansion of FQHCs in the history of this nation to deal with the mental health crisis that is crippling this nation, to deal with the scourge of drugs, many of which are coming across our border. These are actual solutions. You can talk about it as rhetoric, perhaps because your solutions never work.
Yeah, the bottom line is that the $14 billion that I talked about in the previous 5 will go to community health centers and federally qualified health centers. So I've already produced on that, and it's helping. And if you talk to the mental health experts, they are just so elated that we have finally done something. In the past, this kind of money was blocked by Republican senators, by President Trump, by others. Finally, when we were able to do something with a Democratic House, a Democratic Senate, and a Democratic President, we got it done. Again, productivity, not longevity.
The results are always to your benefit. When things don't get done, somehow it's always somebody else's fault. It's almost like nothing's ever gone wrong on his watch. The people at home know the truth. 19 million and shrinking that call this state home, they haven't got the stewardship it deserves. So.
Okay, that is going to bring us to the end of our time, and that's going to do it for this debate. I'd like to thank both candidates for joining us tonight. And if you missed any part of the debate, it will be available in its entirety on the Spectrum News app. That's also where you can find our recent debates for state controller and for governor.
We are also hoping to bring you the debate in the race for state attorney general. Please remember to vote. Early voting is already underway, and Election Day is November 8th. On behalf of Spectrum News 1 and New York 1, thank you for watching and have a great night.